Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. So a friend of mine brought up a really interesting theory the other day. Very intelligent person. A senior to me in age. And we're talking about all the people in the world that are evil, right? And this is going to be sort of an interesting little experiment in what could be. But she said this to me, and I was like, wow, that really explains a lot once you let this kind of roll around in your mind. I don't mean to cause any strangeness in your life contemplating this, but it really boils down to a couple things that I think if you can get this acknowledged in your brain, even if it's just a trick of the mind, it will improve your life drastically. But we're talking about, how fascinating it is that these groups out there that are seemingly destroying the planet always seem to find each other, meaning the individuals have organizations, and it starts young. They end up finding each other. And we could name a bunch of different institutions by which they could be finding each other. I don't know if it even matters. Churches that worship things that we don't naturally gravitate to if you're a good person. Certain lodges that play themselves off as being very innocent, and then you find out you're in over your head, and you got to make a choice whether you want to pull out or not, and maybe there's a threat envelope, depending on how much you know, all those kind of things, right? But before you even get to any of those crazy institutions, it seems that this happens naturally. And it seems that there is a series of events that can happen to an individual's life of disenfranchisement, I should say, right? Where they'll gravitate to others that are disenfranchised. Folks that feel like the world is against them or something of that nature. It used to be when I was young and life kicked your ass, there was always an elder in the room to go, yeah, that's what it does. That's what it does. And that process happens because it's going to make you a better person. Yeah, you got beat up and you didn't do anything to provoke it. Well, toughens you up. Makes you learn how to fight. Fight mentally so you can stay out of as many physical fights as possible. But when it really comes down to it and you taste your own blood running down the back of your throat and you wonder if your nose is broken, you send a little message back to the other guy's nose, and it just keeps going until one of you says, I'm out, or you win, or runs off, right? Whatever age you are when these kind of things take place, right? But my friend said this. She said that souls of a certain frequency tend to gravitate to each other in this plane. But on the other plane of cosmology, a more spiritual plane of cosmology, don't be surprised if there are spirits on the other side that also fuel this. And that's a very important distinction. The reason why I think that's an important distinction is, in this world, you could be a loner in your basement, disenfranchised for whatever reason. You're down there and you don't like being down there and you don't like the mirror and no one's ever given you a word of encouragement. But you're by yourself if you're just in this cosmology. So what could you possibly do by yourself down there by yourself? You can go mentally insane. But that, that turns into more of the lone gunman weird thing. More of your Colorado, was it Trenchcoat Mafia? The two scumbags that went and shot up the school. But what if you weren't alone? What if you weren't alone and these entities, which Tucker Carlson's talked about, it's like the whole world is becoming awake to this other side of the game. Now, psychologists might say, oh, that's just an excuse for your inner turmoil. Whatever. What's interesting about it, I'm going to show you some techniques that you can get this stuff sort of out of your life, and you get out of polarity with that, and all of a sudden life gets a lot better. But imagine the kid in the basement by himself or herself. And before they ever get into any type of internet information that says maybe you should look to the dark side to get your solutions, they're just in a bad frequency. They're vulnerable is the frequency that kicks it all off. It is the spark of life to destroy your life when you're vulnerable. That's why we protect kids. Kids are vulnerable. But these entities circle you. They get around you. And they exacerbate all the little tiny triggers in your mind. They make you suspicious. They make you hateful. They make you come up with a lot of scapegoat theories. Well, this is happening to me because of that thing over there, that person over there, that group over there, that race over there, that company, whatever. Whatever will get you to exude a certain frequency that I would suggest, since they're an entity, they have probably an ecosystem for food. And they're just eating your bad energy. And man, you're making frosting for them. For you, it's the destruction of your life. But just like you might see an insect attached to another insect, like a parasite, and it just feeds on that being, like the movie Alien, right? What is it? The wasp that can put its children inside you through a stinger, and then you just grow their little kitties inside you until they eat you up. It's gross, right? Well, why would that only exist in a physical cosmology? If you believe in a spiritual cosmology, which is nothing more than an energy cosmology that we can't see with our eyes, because we can only see, 3% of the spectrum? 3%, so 97% of all physical life, whether it be physical energy, right? You can't see it. Now, there's an old saying that you got to pick your friends carefully, right? I have a whole episode on this called Friendship. It's a very important episode. I mention this from time to time. You got to make sure you see it from season 1. Just go to the website, search on Friendship, and you go see it, probably at BitChute or on our separate YouTube channel for season 1. Why do you have to pick your friends carefully? Because what goes around hangs around, right? What hangs around goes around. You hang out with a bunch of drug dealers, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be one, you'll probably end up a user. People who are addicted to cocaine and alcohol, they always have a group that grooms them into that situation. And we understand that one because it's a physical world situation. So what would be your recourse for readjusting the spiritual energy or spiritual entities around you? Don't feed them. Don't feed them. Remember, I always say you're good at what you do. But I think it's more insidious and more diabolical than what I'm saying. You know people, to flip the coin for 1 second, you know people that are just bright, wonderful, spiritually bright, people. And they just seem to have good lives. It doesn't really matter if they have stupid materialistic possessions or whether or not they got a big social media presence. A lot of these people don't even have the apps on their phones. Don't even have profiles on any of these things, and they live charmed lives. They may live in a little house in a little town, but they're just so happy when they wake up. For every square ounce of calorie energy they spend in the world, they're getting multiple calories of positivity back. They could be by themselves and they could have a family. But the same thing happens just like it happens in the dark side. Because in this theory, they are surrounded by bright energy. I just rewatched the movie Poltergeist from 1982. And it dawned on me in the center of the film when the little lady comes in to clean the house. She adds a lot more dimension to this fictional story, right? Which is that the little girl was surrounded by a dark force that was enjoying the fact that there were lost souls between this world and perhaps the next spiritual cosmology they're supposed to be going to. You could say heaven or just the next one. But they're stuck in the middle. They didn't go to the light, proverbially, to get to the door to leave. Maybe they didn't want to die. Maybe they want to look after someone, so they ended up staying. And this demonic creature, they didn't quite use that word, but it was around the girl. And the old lady made a very intense distinction. She said, it is talking to her like a child. It is saying things that only a child can understand. It makes her feel safe to be around this being. Heavy, man. If you're a parent and you love your children and you really sit down and watch the film without any distractions, and you live in the shoes of these parents contemplating their little daughter stuck in this horrible world, which is originally was a Twilight Zone, it's very emotional. It's a very powerful script. It's just a perfect movie. Absolutely a perfect movie. But how is it more diabolical? I used to say all the time in season 1 and probably season 2 that you pick your next second of your life. And it's important to pick the best second you can pick. What I like about using a second as an interval is it's pretty easy to conceive of picking a better second. It might be more difficult for me to say, well, live a better life. Just totally write a new script to your life and just live this big gigantic plan in front of you that's all better than the one you've been living in or the one you feel like you're stuck in. That's a little daunting, isn't it? But what if I said you just should pick the next second, a better second? It's pretty easy. You got choices in life. You got choices that make you interact with human beings. You have choices that make you look in the mirror and feel a certain way about yourself. And then maybe it goes down to the nitty-gritty of what food are you putting in your body? Is it artificial? Is it natural? Is it something like sugar that you better be very careful how much you consume? Whatever it is, picking another second that's better will pile up into minutes and hours and days and weeks and years. And eventually that plan, that bigger, better plan, well, how could it be bad if you pick a better second every chance you've got? And actually consciously play the game for a little while. It's just like training wheels. If you talk to older people, there's a very interesting thing that I don't think we consciously realize. They used to have this saying, and I've mentioned this several years ago, but there's that saying that I couldn't stand when I was a kid. They say, life's a bitch and then you die. I was thinking, what kind of saying is that? And what kind of sort of complicity might you have with life falling into that trap? Don't say that and don't believe that, because it's simply not true. Sure, when your body ages, your eyesight goes a little bit and you're going to get some creaks in your bones, and eventually you do die, and you're not going to die because everything's great. You're going to die because stuff got the best of you eventually, right? No matter how much your body and your genealogy has longevity, no one lives forever. But there's something that happens way before those things happen. We are taught to be cynical. We are taught that when we run into obstacles, that we're supposed to embody those obstacles and let them be a part of us. Untrue. What we're supposed to do is let any obstacle that's in front of us be pushed aside and forgotten. But the technique that you use to get around that obstacle becomes a part of you, a positive part of you, so the obstacle never ever shows its face again. But there's a big one that occurs. It's occurred in my life, and there's very definitive moments for me that I think I can see this being potentially sort of the self-imposed shifting of a universe that you're in to a slightly negative version of the universe you were previously in. If the next second you pick, or if you're just allowing the seconds to happen without consciously controlling them, you can slip into some pretty intense darkness and find yourself overwhelmed at some point when it gets so much darker than where you were when you last paid attention that you're wondering how we got here. The earth itself is going through a huge transformation for a lot of us. Maybe discussing it at this nauseum level that we're discussing it is almost like sinking our claws into this bad universe, and we won't leave because we're trying to fix this bad universe, which is always destined to be broken. The game is to switch universes 1 second at a time. But what am I talking about? What are the concrete examples of what I'm talking about? I have a very interesting personal experience with my journey in California. I come from, again, a little tiny town, very peaceful, very wonderful. It is truly like a Twilight Zone set. Sure, there's ups and downs and all that good stuff, but overall, it's pretty Norman Rockwell, right? I mean, my hometown's 100 miles from where Walt Disney grew up, and downtown Disney's modeled after his hometown, and you could do the same modeled after my hometown. It's good. But I come to California with idealistic dreams, very little expectations. I was literally planning on living in my car until I made enough money to live elsewhere. But I got very fortunate to be able to squat a room from my boss who owned a house with another guy, and I never had to do that. But for years, I'm in my car driving around Southern California, making famous software, switching over to making video games. I mean, oh my gosh, I was a kid in the teens making video games at home, at school, and now I was drawing them professionally. Music was wonderful. California was really well run. And I was in a beautiful area. I just couldn't even believe it. And it kept going and kept going. Until something happened. We had a recession in the early 90s. About 1990, 91. It was hitting my older friends in the real estate area, and it was hitting me in just places I could work because companies were getting bought up. The software company I was working for got bought up by a company in San Diego, and there were some people kicking everybody out and stealing all the stock. Liquidating, literally completely illegal activity. Never got caught, of course. But I had to move away from this euphoric place that I loved to a place I didn't love. Even though there's some benefits to being in Silicon Valley, it's at 50-50 at best. But I let that consume me. I allowed myself to dislike where I was. I allowed myself to be on a rail where life was controlling me. That I was the ball in the pinball machine, and I wasn't controlling any of the flippers or any of the bumpers. Now, I was able to reverse that about halfway through the journey because the internet exploded, and all of a sudden my artistic and programming skills kicked in, and I was having a lot of fun making money and having a good time. I had a music studio. I was making music professionally. It was cool. But it took a little while to flip that around. But then a very interesting thing happens. We all know about 2001, September, right? Well, what was interesting for me, and I've told this story before, and this is all about picking the seconds and surrounding yourself with the energy that would resonate you either into the universe you want to live in or the one you don't want to live in. I was one of the lead engineers or architects, not engineers, architects of Electronic Arts' first big gaming website. I wasn't hired for that, but I was the guy with the most knowledge. We had this huge consulting firm in there charging us millions of dollars a month. They had no clue how to do anything. It was interesting. So I just rose up through the ranks. And it was going well until some business problems occurred on that, and we weren't able to execute what we set out to do in the first place. And so now we're spending $320 million on a site that's going to fail. And most of us knew the landscape of the industry, of the internet, and knew this is not going to work. A bunch of people got hired that shouldn't have been hired. But there was a tremendous amount of negativity building up in this otherwise incredible company because it wasn't the dark side at that point. It still had the original OG workers that were creating great games and cared about everything. But this feedback loop was massive, and it was powerful for me personally. You're talking about probably 40% of employees loved coming to work every day, me being one of them, and about 60% hated every minute of working there on this internet side of the game. It got to the point there was a rumor website on the outside that was writing these horrible articles about things that were going on internally. I even got blamed by a jerk boss of mine for writing some of the articles, which I didn't. And so I hear I'm getting accused by a boss for doing this negative stuff, and I'm like, all I want to do is get back to like making EA great again, right? At the height of the internal dismay of this company, especially when we were starting to see that this deal we did with AOL at the time was just worthless, just hundreds of millions of dollars going down the tube, all this work for 2 years straight, not seeing our families, or when we do see our families, it was very stressful. Always some asshole walking around the hallways going, "Where's that person?" You know, like, well, they're seeing their kid that was just born yesterday. That's not an excuse for not being there. I mean, we had some jerks like that working in the company. Not that many, but one bad apple can really sour the whole batch, right? when 9/11 happens in my life, it so coincided with just months and months and months of just peaking negativity, incredible levels of negativity. It was almost an identical thing between what I was feeling on a daily basis, the hopelessness of being able to change an otherwise obligatory moment in time, the failure that was coming was just on top of most of us who were sentient in the company. And then all of a sudden, this outside event occurs. And again, the night before that whole thing happens, I literally had a physical premonition in a room with my girlfriend at the time. I still to this day can't explain it. I'm looking at the ceiling, which is a white ceiling. We had both lights on both end tables in this otherwise all white room. And I saw two planes pass each other. And I had this horrible feeling. It was literally September 10th, the night of. And I said, I have this horrible feeling that something really bad's going to happen and is going to involve planes. I said this out loud in the room. And the girl next to me goes, me too. What the hell does that mean? She doesn't remember saying it. And she doesn't remember me saying it, of course. But I can still see it in my head right now. It's just exactly the way I saw it. So there was something cosmic going around. And I was probably surrounded by folks that were, energy that was both positive and negative. But if my inability to change what was going on at work was getting the best of me, it was at least 51% probably negative. And I don't know if I was being shown this by the negative side or being shown this by the positive side, but I felt it. I felt it, I saw it, and I said it. Crazy, right? I don't have many of those in my entire life. But this goes on for, after that event occurred, I was on for another, about 8 months. 8 months later, in 2002, the third round of complete layoffs of all the employees of the EA.com division were let go. There was about 12 people that got pushed over to studio, and the whole other division was dissolved. It was a very sad day. I lost millions of dollars the day this occurred. Literally, like tens of millions, okay? But I get laid off, and I have some money in the bank, so I'm good. And I go home, and there's this huge relief that I am no longer attached to that negativity. And the entity that was the negativity basically evaporated. Yeah, the site's still there at the time. They went off and bought Pogo to fill in the hole. But at least it was over. The nightmare was over. And the year starts repairing itself. My life starts repairing itself. I play video games for 45 days. I hadn't played a game for 3 years solid. Now I play a bunch of different games for about 45 days. What's that do? Well, it gets rid of that riffraff. There's so much food for that other entity, that other classification of entity. They don't need to feed on me. The whole world is in trauma. I'll just go at anybody in the world and just scrape the frosting off and eat it. You don't need me anymore. So when I rejected it, it was very easy for them to move on to something else. By the end of that year, I got word that I got to relocate to Southern California. And Southern California, which I'd never lived in Orange County before. I was always told it was like this crazy place, a bunch of conservative weirdos. Complete lie. So 2003, January 1st, I closed the door on my new house down here in Huntington Beach, California. I'm renting it. Life starts repairing itself. It took me 2 years and about 3 months to form my video game company, which then kept going for 8 years. Roughly. But slowly, I was out of that mix. Those 2 years were brutal 2 years. Financially brutal. I didn't have a company set up. No one was hiring because the war was starting to heat up. But I was happy because I wasn't in that other place anymore. All those dark moments were over. And what I could scoop off of that was down here. All my clients and mentors were here. And so I could go see them anytime I wanted to. And that list just kept building and building and building. So imagine this. Go back to the friendship algorithm for a second. There's not a single wise adult that won't lecture you about picking your friends. And if you find that a friend was good and they go negative and you put a little effort in to maybe steer them back into positivity, but they are committed to their drug addiction, to whatever they're doing wrong, that they keep bringing you that energy. Wise people will tell you, you have to get rid of that person from your primary circle of friends. You don't have to be rude to them, but you just turn them down more often to the point they get the idea. Sometimes that can cause them to change, and it repairs their life as well. So now, what am I actually talking about here? I'm talking about your mental attitude is picking the next second. If you let life happen to you, oh boy, you're in for a ride, and it most likely won't be a positive one. The minute you realize that you're in control, oh boy, it flips around really, really fast. Because even a teeny tiny change, I call it mowing tall grass. You know, you got a house that's got 3-foot grass out front because no one's taking care of the place. If you can even just get a weed whacker and get it down to 8 inches, still needs to be mowed, it looks a lot better, doesn't it? So even just a little tiny change when things are super bad, it's like when you have a bunch of weight on your body. You can lose 10 pounds, 25 pounds a month. If the heavier you are, the more you'll lose per month. And when you get down to the last 10 pounds, well, that'll take you 6 months sometimes. It's interesting. But if you're really hopeless, if you're really feeling negative, like your life is upside down, well, guess what? You're going to be losing 25 pounds a month of negativity. The second you realize there's a magneto button on the side of that pinball machine, right? And when you push it, you, the ball, stop in the middle of that field and you got bumpers ready to go. And you realize, man, I'm actually the one controlling these bumpers. And if I think about it a little bit different, a good pinball player will go from randomly smacking this ball around to realizing you can hold the ball, you can let the flipper loose, and the ball comes down really slow on that on that flipper, and you can flip it early to get it really high up in the field of play, or you can get it right on the tip to go into a special little chamber, then maybe saves the ball, and you get 5 balls on the screen at the same time. If you ever do get more than one ball on a pinball machine, look dead center in the middle of the field. Do not look at the balls individually, and you'll find out that your peripheral vision, which is way faster than your vision in front, you'll be playing those 5 balls for 10 minutes. It's great. Second you focus on one of the balls, then you're going to lose all the other ones and probably the one you're looking at. But if the thoughts that we manifest in our brains control the actual version of the universe that you're in, remember, you've heard those theories 100 times, and it makes mathematical sense that every potential future and past that could exists at the same exact time. It does, in my opinion at least. And your soul is just falling through one of those frequencies. And the reason why it's difficult to move from a negative frequency, let's say negative 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, to a positive 10, all in one shot. I think it can be done, but it's a little, got to be something pretty amazing. Maybe you get married to the right person, or you meet the right person, or you have a kid, or something that you've always wanted in your life happens, and then you could just jump 20 points up. But on an organic day, let's just get, 0.1 better every few seconds. It keeps going up. But it's all manifested from your brain. It's manifested by your acceptance of whatever reality you're living. I want to repeat that. It's your acceptance of the way that you're living that makes it manifest. If you don't accept it, then you could be in a pretty negative situation and you can breathe a big, deep breath of positivity and go, you know what? I just realized I'm in the wrong place and I'm not accepting this anymore. And so what I'm going to do is change this. And the first thing you do is you cease to accept the situation that you're in. Most people that can cold turkey a drug, whether it be alcohol or some other drug, they've just realized that they were addicted and it's destroyed their life. And they take a deep breath and they just change. They just don't drink anymore. Don't sniff coke anymore. Don't shoot heroin anymore. Don't do whatever they're doing anymore. And then slowly the body starts to repair. And you start to feel a lot better about yourself. It's very powerful. Almost everyone has gone through that. If you're probably 30 years old, you've done it at least once, if not a few times. The older you are, you've done it a lot of times, typically, unless you've lived a pretty controlled life. But if it's what we think and what we accept in this reality, if that's the trigger mechanism to control that next second, what about a device called the television? Televisions used to be these things that families would save up for and buy, and there was just like a little tiny screen in the center of the living room. And then they got cheaper and bigger, and then they got color. And then you go to the movie theater. Movie theaters are before TVs, if you remember that. Now it's on every single device, your telephone, your tablet, your computer. It's everywhere now. Can you get away from it? Can you go to an airport and not see it? Answer is no. Can you go to a restaurant and not see it? A bar? No. You have to be on a beach. You have to be in the wilderness. You have to be completely away from technology to not have this stuff broadcast at you. And think about it today. Can you imagine going to a remote area without your telephone? I mean, they sell you all this emergency stuff, but can you really sit down if you've had cell phone reception and not try to check the news? If you're addicted to social media, could you possibly not go to Facebook today? Or Instagram or any of these other things? Probably not if you're not in control, if you don't perceive it as a manipulation mechanism. Well, is that the product? Is that the product? We know that the television is used to do all kinds of things. It could be used for pure goodness. You could watch an educational course. I've been doing that a lot in the last 5 years. Learned a lot of stuff. It's been instrumental to my growth in the last 5 years. But that's an eclectic thing. Well, what if the game is simply that they understand that? Remember how The Secret got really famous in the early 2000s? For those of you who missed it, it was the sort of cleansed consumer version of What the Bleep Do We Know, which is a movie you should see. I'll go to that next. But The Secret was all about manifesting your destiny. It was exactly what I'm telling you. It's not a new story. But they don't break it down to the granularity that I'm telling you. They don't want to acknowledge that there could be multiple universes that you're simply floating through. Sad, right? Because it's probably true. If you believe we're in a matrix, it's most definitely true. If you believe we're in an agnostic mathematical universe, it's extremely true. It would only be the Christian or the Muslim or whatever, or organized religion that would want to fight such a concept, because that takes the control away from those organized religions. It takes away the donation on a Sunday, because you start to figure out the fabric of the universe. We know that there's literally billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in television per year. We know now, because it's now on our face, that the predictive programming is inside television. Something that they want to do in the future. They show it to you, so when it happens, you'll accept it. You'll accept it on a subconscious level, and you may actually end up accepting it on a conscious level. They try to sell you the rationale why horrible things are happening to you, and that you actually deserve those horrible things. But none of that's true. But they sell you the acceptance first, then they do it to you. Imagine they wanted to turn you into a slave. Well, they would start programming you on TV with slavery. Well, it's a good thing. Class structure is great. You're not as smart as that other guy, so shouldn't you answer to that other guy? Then when it starts happening to you by law, you'd be like, well, yeah, you're right. I'm a ditch digger. I can't make jets and rockets and paintings and movies. I can't compose music. The true answer is you could, if they would let you be educated, or if you would take measures to teach yourself something. But not everyone's a self-educator. But what if it's just really simple? Negativity. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is. Can I make you feel negative through press, through fiction, through any means of television? I told you about What the Bleep Do We Know. It's a very interesting film. For anyone who has seen What the Bleep Do We Know, you know it very well typically, and it's something that's sort of an heirloom to your education of how the universe probably works. The only thing I'll put in there is that for some weird reason, and they love doing this, is they put a crackpot channeler in there who is known as a charlatan, and we have a listener who's actually rescued a friend out of this woman's weird cult, and he actually had a privileged moment to see her doing some pretty stupid stuff by herself. Very interesting. But there's only this one woman. You see channeler in there as a name. Just realize those little stink bombs are put into legitimate projects so that you can blow it off later on when all the truth it comes out, and they want to say, don't believe this show called What the Bleep Do We Know. See how that weird woman is in there? Who would put that in there if any of this was true? The truth of the matter is, I can tell you from my own personal experience working with producers of shows, you will be a part of a legitimate project and they'll go and say, oh gosh, this is really powerful. We can't allow the public to have 100% confidence in this information because they'll transform the world and we'll be out of business of controlling humanity. And so they just pay someone off to go to this woman, interview her, and literally inject it in like a splice into the show, and it will compromise what you believe to be an otherwise great paradigm. But the paradigm is this. You do manifest your reality, but what they get to is something called a neural peptide. It's manufactured in the brain. This is a very real thing, and I know a guy that mastered this. I met him 2 or 3 times in 2003 and 4. But what it is that your brain listens to your thoughts, especially about your physical presence. If you think you're fat, the neuropeptide will increase your fat. If you think that you're ripped and shredded, that's what it's going to bring down. If you believe you have good muscle density and good everything, it'll manufacture that. The guy that I met in Laguna, from my other guy that I told you about in a couple episodes back, who mentored me for about a year, who was way up there in the world control system, okay? He wanted me to meet this guy. The guy could paint a painting with 2 hands simultaneously, and being a painter myself, he's legit. But he had 2 sons, and he showed up in this van because he has all of his gear in this van. He takes everywhere to do stuff. I think he spent most of his time in his van. He had a house, but he just loved his van, and I don't blame him. It was really tricked out, cool. But his kids said, feel his arm. And this guy, he was like, kids, don't do it. And he said, no, do it, Dad. And so he pulls out his arm, like a Popeye forearm, right? Both of them were Popeye forearms, man. And I looked at, and I grabbed this guy. I mean, it's kind of weird, grabbing some other dude's arm. It's just, he thought it was strange. I thought it was strange. But oh my Lord, this dude was, it's not even the word rip doesn't even get to it. I've never seen forearms like this in my life. I mean, and he looked at me and he goes, the big deal is I don't work out. This dude was probably mid-40s. And again, I don't know any military person. I mean, maybe a bodybuilder that I haven't met. I don't know any bodybuilders personally, but I've seen some pretty yoked out guys in LA and even Orange County. And I mean, you'd have to be a competitor. And the rest of his body was just really, really super fit. But I mean, the guy was just a brick. I couldn't squeeze his arm. It was just a brick because he has been training his neural peptides to say, this is what I look like. Legit, crazy, amazing programming of the mind. What if it was that easy? I said 9 years ago, I think it's in my existential episode, what if God's greatest gift to humanity is that we create it? It's just such a huge concept that we don't believe it. And we're not talking about, I got a gold bar in my hand. Maybe you can get to that state of consciousness. I always think if that kind of thing were ever true, then homeless people would be just crapping out all kinds of stuff because they get all mentally feral when they don't have enough nutrition. They would just turn into knights in shining armor because they'd have a fantasy one day. I don't think that's the way it works. But what does William Shatner say? He's 92 years old now. What does he say? How do you look so good, William? He said, well, when I was in my 30s or 40s, I simply said, I'm not interested in getting old. I'm not going to buy into it. He's the proof in the pudding, isn't he? High school reunions are very interesting in this regard. I've said this story too. We're on topic now. I go back to my high school reunion. There's a bunch of us that look really young. And there's a group that looks really old. And I mean way beyond our years. They look like they're in their 60s, late 60s, but they're only in their early 50s, late 40s. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was with a friend of mine who looked extremely young for her age. And we're looking at each other like, man, why is that table right there so old looking? And again, one guy smoked a bunch of cigarettes and had no teeth in his head. Other than that guy, we started listening to the way they were talking. And if they're happy, then fantastic. I'm not judging anybody. But they were all into the sayings about being old. Table muscle, I got table muscle, all that kind of saying. Their neural peptides are saying age, age, age. These people want to be older, 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 older. Ever wonder why you gain weight in the wintertime, but you're pretty nice in the summertime, at least by August? Well, there's obviously arguments for genetics, putting it on, and when the body gets cold, it slows down, and so your metabolism changes and that kind of thing. Probably largely attributable to that. But what if, for however many years humanity has existed in this cosmology, it was a lot better to be a little more a little bit more plump, because food is a little scarce. Remember the symbol for scorpion? I think it was September, right? Somewhere in that time frame, that was when you got bit. If you didn't save up food, you got bit and your village died. And so that was, remember, the zodiac system is nothing more than an almanac system for how to rotate crops. It's nothing to do with whether or not you're compatible with someone else. I mean, it's interesting to think about. If you're born in winter, then your brain starts forming in winter cycles. And if you're born in the summer, it forms to summer algorithms. And yeah, you could be more compatible with seasonal things because of your mental programming, depending on where you were born. If you're born in an equatorial range of the world, then it's summer all the time. So maybe you're just a summer kid no matter what year you're born in Egypt. But if you're born in Norway, the seasons are going to greatly change your first 8 months of life. We are always looking for solutions that come in the form of a pill, aren't we? I mean, and that's a literal thing and that's a metaphorical thing. What is the promise of a pill? I take this, 0 effort, all I had to do was swallow the pill, and suddenly whatever's wrong with me fixes itself. And the problem with that theory and that habitual nature is that it's more of the symbol in your brain of low effort or no effort creates all the change that you want in your life. Now, less is more is definitely a philosophy I subscribe to in a lot of areas. Less is more is probably not going to make you more educated, but less is more might reduce a lot of anxiety in your life. Think about the difference between people from the 1800s, anywhere on planet Earth, and people in the 1950s. What's the huge genetic difference in the consumption of brain activity? 1850, your world was what you dealt with. Reality was reality. Sure, there were plays, and maybe you'd sing a song at a party with the fiddle and all that good stuff. Maybe see an orchestra or whatever. But the effort to see those things was a lot more pronounced. You had to stop what you're doing, travel to another town, go to a theater unless you lived in a big city. It was farming, it was tilling, it was raising children, it's being a husband, being a wife. It's dealing with the elements of the seasons, depending on where you live. Surviving was usually the number one priority. It wasn't eating sugar. It wasn't ingesting tremendous amounts of fiction. Oh, you probably read a book here and there. Books were probably a little bit different. I mean, remember Jules Verne was one of the guys that first really invented the fantasy, man. Like, oh my God. Going to the center of the earth, traveling in a time machine. Concepts that man hadn't quite, seen put down in a really believable manner. Monsters in the ocean. Stories that were printed and you could carry them with you as opposed to meeting a sailor that might tell you a story about a mermaid. Very powerful to be able to duplicate and print fiction. But what about 1950? Let's say 1955, where most homes had a TV. In the civilized world, they had TVs, or at least the people had access to one next door or some community center where they could see something. Most everybody had one. Well, at that point, we're deeply 20 years into radio. So radio fiction, my gosh, it's actually better than television fiction in a lot of cases, because when you hear a monster, your brain thinks of a perfect monster to freak you out. Your wife's thinking about a different one. Your kids are thinking about different ones. And so you're all crafting from your imagination that which will scare you the most. But the second someone picks a man that looks like a fish and he's crawling out of a lagoon, well, half the room's laughing because that doesn't scare them at all. And they can see a man in a rubber suit. And the other half are screaming at the top of their lungs because they completely buy the illusion. What about now? 2024. How many streaming services do we have? And how much content do we have? I mean, I tell you, I watch hundreds of old movies a year. Hundreds of old productions on television and things. The ones I find to be the best fictional. And I'm adjusting the fictional arcs for writing research, right? At least that's my excuse. But at home, you know, I meet guys in cigar lounges and in public, and people will say, have you seen that series? Have you seen that series? And these guys will have 4 or 5 series they have watched since I've seen them in the last 30 days. At home, binging this stuff. And I will tell you that unequivocally, what's interesting about them, because I'm not interested in this thing that they're mentioning, unless it's something I'm already interested in, like Fallout or something like that, which I think is very unique. And it's the only reason I love Fallout is because of the video game I played for 20 years, okay? They're less equipped to deal with life. They're more delusional when they start talking about what life's all about, who's in control of the world, how, you know, and they buy all the narratives. The more that they ingest, tell a vision, they're just completely a cuck for the ruling class of this place. We all want more control of our lives, don't we? The sad fact is, and this is very common with children, if you're a parent of a child, you know that your child starts feeling that rite of passage. What does that really translate to? Well, they have now seen cause and effect happen so many times in their life that they feel like, okay, hey, you don't need to tell me about being tired in the morning when it's time to get up for school. I think I can stay up till 10 o'clock, still get 8 hours, get up at 6 o'clock, which probably even early for them, early for the parents, excuse me, and I'll still get to school and study great. So can I stay up, you know, an hour longer? And they're always fighting all the parameters around their life. It just becomes more and more intense. Now, in first world countries, we have lost a true rite of passage, which I think is this huge shame. Third world countries have all kinds of rites of passage, which it's a ritual that says, you do this, and now you're a man. You do this, and now you're a woman. What's interesting about taking control of your life is that if you're taking control in an area that you've never controlled before, you should probably take baby steps because you don't know. As euphoric as it might feel to get on that bicycle for the very first time, that it balances and you realize, oh my gosh, it's like Steve Jobs said, he learned that the calorie energy conversion from a human on a bicycle pushing pedals is the most amazing conversion of energy into velocity on the surface of the planet. The bicycle is an amazing invention. The kids feel the exact same way, and all of us felt that way usually when we move out of our parents' house, even if we're kicked out. Doesn't matter. You're in control now. You can buy food you want to eat, even if it's crap. You can stay up as late as you want and pay the price the next morning. You can drink when you get access to it or get of age. And get that hangover in the morning. You make a decision whether or not that's a fun feeling or not. The more you're goal-oriented, societies tend to do a lot better. Why do you want control? Why? The fundamental thrust of this episode is so you can live a more positive life and get these creatures, these entities off of you. Because you're no longer producing the food that they like to eat. I can tell you my own journey. And it started for me around the time I created the Black Apple episode back in the day. I guess it's about season 3 or so. You can look it up on deepthoughtsradio.com. But there are methods by which I believe this energy works against you. And the big one is inserting visions into your mind, just like a television. So we're worried about the in-your-face electronic invention, which is the television. We know what it does. It's very apparent. If they can make you terrified. I've got friends of mine that can't remotely think about zombies because Walking Dead hit it right on the head for them. I mentioned it the other day to a friend of mine who knows terrified of the show. We were together and the power went down at this restaurant. I said, oh gosh. And I joked with the waitress who came over to explain it to us. I says, is this our first episode of Our Walking Dead? And everybody laughed around me. And I said, wouldn't it be funny, because we're in a really nice place, beach area. And I said, wouldn't it be funny if the actor who played Rick just happened to walk by and he's pretending to be in the, like it's all started. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, Rick, she goes, I've canceled that entire show out of my life. But anyway, the Black Apple concept, in short, is that when you think of truth, and this is a big Hindu thing too, when you think about truth, true truth, it comes from within you because it's empirical. It is not questionable. Do you love this person? You'll know. I love this person. Well, who are you? Like, what do you identify as? Boom, you'll say your name. You'll say whatever. It's your truth for that moment. But when something comes from outside and you are daydreaming, right? And you might get a suspicious thought. Oh gosh, this, that, and this, and that, and this. And that's now, oh, that's probably true. What if it wasn't true until you manifested some fake program that's being broadcast at you into your life? And then suddenly, an otherwise good person in your life becomes a negative person in your life. They become that negativity. What I say about switching universes. In one universe, your friend remains that beautiful person. It could be your boyfriend or girlfriend, your husband or your wife, your kid. In one universe, they stayed true to you because you weren't suspicious about their behavior. But in one universe, you started getting jealous, suspicious, strange things. Suspicion is a great emotion you got to be very careful with. You want to fight suspicion on one level. When you're in a survival mode, you're going to have to watch your back, obviously, but most of us are not in that mode. But what if even being suspicious in that mode makes you have the worst case of tribulations during a survival situation? You're switching universes. You're switching characters. Well, there's a good wife and there's a cheating wife. There's a good husband and a cheating husband. Cheating doesn't always mean infidelity, but it could just mean something that's just betraying the union that you have. Haven't you ever had a thought where you thought, well, I just know that's the case. And then suddenly it's the case. And then you pat yourself on the back. Oh, I've done it. I've done it 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Oh, I read that person perfectly. And the negativity showed up. But maybe it's just because I have an extremely powerful connection with my manifest circuit. And so I bred back in the day, negative moments. While my friend next to me doesn't have any of those suspicions, and he's not having any of the problems I'm having. Because he just accepts positivity. No one's feeding on him, right? Those entities don't feed on him. If you take the Freudian chapters in psychology, which technically be psychiatry, but you learn about the id, right? And the way that Freud broke it down, in case you haven't heard this in a while or you've never heard this, is that you have your persona on the outside. This is who you pretend to be to various demographics, and you have several personas, right? You talk to an old person at a hospice, and you're just really careful with their psychology because they may not even know who they are. They may think you're their son or their daughter, and you're playing along, right? But you talk to a child and you reduce your complexity for the child and talk to your worker. You get me? Then you have the next inner layer called your character. And your character is what you really are. Some people know who their character is. Some people don't know who their character is because they actually are so in love with their personas, they never get down to what really makes them tick. If you don't know how you tick, boy, you're going to be that pinball getting kicked all around that machine. The second you realize, oh my gosh, I actually don't like that, but I keep telling my wife I like that, she doesn't really care if I don't like it. I just need to be honest with her, and then I won't have to deal with this thing I don't like. But I'm living in the persona for my wife and not my character. You got to be careful about how you communicate large changes in your behavior. Just be upfront, be gentle, okay? But the third layer is the one that really gets us. And the more you can conceive of it, and I have a great movie recommendation for you to see. It's the id, ID. And that is your inner kind of furnace that conjures up things. The movie you should see if you really want to understand one great example of how the id could be positive and how the id could be negative is the movie Forbidden Planet from 1956 with Leslie Nielsen playing a serious captain on a starship. It is the movie that debuted Robbie the Robot, and it is the movie that Gene Roddenberry based Star Trek off of, which happened 10 years later, okay, in 1966. If you haven't seen that movie, it is the most expensive science fiction movie made until 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is an utter masterpiece, and the props were reused all over Twilight Zones and all over movies, which is what drove Kubrick to get rid of a lot of his assets, or at least lock them away so nobody could ever show up with a suit or some prop in someone else's movie. But it is very interesting, because the more you get in tune with yourself, the more you'll identify areas where you're not in complete control and you don't know why. Now, maybe that's just bad AI coding. Maybe that's just the sort of spice of life, kind of turbulent area where your soul and your body connect to make the mind. It just throws you in different directions to make sure that you don't stagnate as a person. If you try this, you try that. It's like electrons coming off of an atom, you know? It makes you try new things. That might be part of it too. But if you're at a person who's like, man, I really want to just control my emotions on a daily basis, because that tends to lead to a much better execution of daily chores of life. It can be kind of frustrating if you kind of anthropomorphize this lack of control you have in your deep consciousness, right? Why did I do that? You know, I don't know why I did that. And again, sometimes you might say that the next morning, but in the end, you're like, well, I'm kind of glad I did it. That was kind of cool, right? As long as no one got hurt. Well, if there's an entity that feeds on another entity, even in this world, again, the alien in the movie Alien from 1979, directed by Ridley Scott, was based on some insects that were doing this to other insects, inserting the eggs inside another insect, and then the inserter would run off, and this other thing would run around. Like there's a caterpillar that gets this, and all of a sudden it just gets consumed by the kids, right? Well, when John Hurt had his chest burst in that movie, we got to see this for the very first time in most of our lexicons. We didn't know this was happening in the insect world. Well, there's always kind of a feeding area, right? There's always some attractive moment, attractive location from one life force to another. Now, when I'm talking about the black apple, I know this is extremely abstract, but try to hang on. The black apple thing is pretty much in your consciousness. I don't know what you'd call that, but if you take it in subconsciously and it triggers within you, maybe it actually feeds down to your core. So you believe these are your thoughts. Just know that when you're daydreaming and you take something in and you suddenly believe it's real, this happens in the Twilight Zone when you are just trying to go to sleep. You may not have identified this, but I've talked to several people who are very granular with their existence, and they're like, oh yeah, this happens. You will manifest a fiction in a split second in your Twilight Zone. So you're on your bed, you're trying to doze off, And this thing will come out. It might be something weird like you have a bill you haven't paid. It doesn't really exist, but you'll have that anxiety in your chest for a split second until you realize, wait a minute, I don't even own that product. Why would there be a bill? Or you've betrayed someone or something like that, and you haven't even talked to them in 20 years. You left them good. It's all just weird things. It's all based on your history that you can manifest these weird things. For me, that's almost a sign that this is a very real ecosystem. It's either a defect in the human consciousness or subconsciousness, right? Or it is, like Tucker Carlson has described and many others have described recently, as we kind of all have this giant awakening, right? That we live in an ecosystem with other beings that we do not have eyesight of. And so seeing is believing isn't always the absolute when it comes to knowing all things. It's going to be very interesting as the deep fake starts to destroy your ability to believe anything, which has already started, right? We're well within that envelope. How will man's mind evolve to discern reality when deep fake is destroying your reality? And I think the answer is very simple. You pull out of television. Seeing is believing will be only something that you can rely on if you're in the real world and not being in a state where you're consuming some sort of fictional pixel reality. On that note, I have an episode called Pixel Power. That's what it's all about. It's not about computers. The other movie review I did, which I talk about this, is Looker. Inside that movie, written by Michael Crichton and directed by Michael Crichton, they have a huge dissertation at the third act of that movie where the guy is just talking to a group of like media controllers, and he's saying, look, we're going to start controlling minds by controlling the TV. I just watched an Outer Limits where this kid had created cold fusion. And this is in a script from 1998, 99. And the guy is telling this kid who's kind of holding everyone ransom with a cold fusion bomb. He said, look, why don't you just tell me how this works, and then we will buy up all the resources in the world that actually allow you to make that machine. He goes, look, you can't, because you can build out of stuff in a kitchen. And he says, well, then we'll steer the education system away from that truth so no one will discover it. This is in a script, right? What do you think has happened where do you think ether went in the universe, right? You got steered away from the thing that will immediately give you 0-point energy, that will immediately allow you to theorize engines that could literally let you go anywhere you want, zero gravity. You can't see that stuff, right? Well, if anything I'm telling you is true, think about how easy it is. It's difficult to believe what I've told you in this episode, isn't it? I mean, for some folks, you could probably name several people in your family that if you even try to bring up this conversation, you get glass eyes and they would look away like, this kid's nuts, right? We like to think that we're very complex beings, right? And on one level, we are. We look at each other and we have what we call that, reading someone else's character. I'm a good judge of character is what we say, right? And it's just your physical being. It's how you talk. It's sort of that subliminal aura that you sort of exude. You can tell if a guy's tense or if a guy's relaxed. If you know them, you can query. If you don't know them, you can either be careful or you can get closer to them because they're putting out a really good vibe. But it's difficult for us to believe that there could be an entity, okay, that lives outside your visual spectrum, but lives right on top of you. Right? There's been a Doctor Who episode back in the 70s that had a bug that was on this girl's back, and the doctor could see it, but other people couldn't see it, and it was just feeding on you, man. But what if this other entity looks at us, and it's so old, and it's so genetically predispositioned to do what it's doing over billions and billions of generations of this other being's life cycle, that it just attaches to a human being and goes, oh, this is the easiest meal I've ever had in my life. This kid's buying into everything they're selling. Look at all the mental illness in the world right now. It's in every category of thought that a human being has ever had. They have invented a mental illness for everybody. And we can't be certain that we're not suffering from some of it. Some of it's trying to live a life of sort of definitive truth, and the world's totally gaslit, so how are you going to find out the truth in that kind of world? When people take paychecks every day to do that to other human beings, it's kind of sick, right? Okay. Maybe less is more is a bit of a solution to that. Again, your sphere of influence is the only thing that you can control, and you're at the center of it. You can only control your sphere of influence. You try to help your children build their sphere of influence and their sort of perception of the universe. And you can't teach them only the good stuff, but if you want to teach them a cautionary tale, like a Grimm Brothers tale, don't wander out in the woods or this lady's going to eat you. Don't wander out in the woods or a wolf will get you. Those are just little stories to say, okay, you know I'm not really telling you the truth, or eventually you're going to figure out I was just telling you a story. But in the end, you stayed out of the woods and you get eaten by a bear or potentially a wolf, depending on where you live, right? We teach behavioral stories, like the Aesop fable of the boy who called wolf. Don't lie, kids, because if you lie, no one's going to trust you. And when you really need them to believe you, well, they're not going to believe you. And you're going to potentially suffer as a result of that. So how do you start changing this whole thing, right? You listen to me and you're like, well, that's a pretty cool idea. Maybe I could try that a little bit. Well, the first thing I would have you do is just take inventory of your life. How do you feel on a daily basis? You know, we wake up and we go through a ritual every single day. And then we go to bed. And what I would say is that every single phase of your ritual is a phase that you examine. Well, I take a shower in the morning, then I get some food in my belly, then I go to work or go to school or whatever I do. And then there's a middle. There's a lunch period, maybe. There's a dinner period. There's a recreational period, whatever. And then you hop into bed. Each one of those phases, because you're changing the entire registry of your life, everything that's participating in your life becomes a different set of circumstances. So you want to check every quadrant of your life or every sector of your life to see, well, you know what? Really dig this part, but I don't like that part that much. You know, believe me, we're all tired in the morning. I get it. But there's certain points in your life where it seems like I'm kind of negative. Or I go to bed at night and I don't sleep very well because I got stuff on my mind. It's not creative stuff. It's gnawing things. Well, the better you can take inventory of those situations and what's actually triggering you is, well, one, you probably can't affect change on all these things. If you find something bad, you're going to have to, you want a new job. Well, that's not going to probably be an overnight fix. But you're to find out there's a lot of little things that are just simply you buying into an attitude. Then you have to ask yourself, is the attitude I'm buying in coming from me, inside my heart? Or is it coming from the outside towards me? If it's coming from the outside towards you, I'm going to give you this little phrase I've said a few times a long time ago. I saw a gentleman walk into a convenience store in New York, and the guy asked him, "How you doing, buddy?" He was kind of a weird guy, but he was positive. And he goes, "I'm doing great because I don't let people rent space in my mind." I was like, whoa, that's a weird thing to say. What was he actually saying? He doesn't allow the black apples in. He controls his brain. So when someone tells him to be negative or something is negative, that's trying to rent space in his mind. Okay, he doesn't allow that to occur. Now, probably isn't perfect at it, but he seemed pretty in control of his existence. Very inspiring to me. I always find the guys like that are just sitting around with tons of gems falling out of them. It's great. But here's what I've noticed. I live a pretty good life because I don't expect much from life, right? And I've been able to accomplish almost all my goals in life. Okay. So I don't really walk around in super negativity, but I don't like, certain aspects of the world at this point. And of course, I'm always trying to improve myself, yada, yada. I have noticed that just by actively shunning any attempt for negativity to be around me or inserted in me, meaning I'm not with anybody else, But my mind swims, at night. I'm a creative writer guy. And so, I fantasize all kinds of wild stuff. Partly it's because I'm working on a script and it's some sort of scene. But I let the script turn on. The scene happens, write it down, or make a mental note. And then I say, that's just a script. I'm moving back into my life. Script, go away. Ooh, suddenly I feel a lot better. Suspicion. I have been getting rid of suspicion in my life. And oddly enough, none of them are true. It's interesting. I have usually been a fairly forceful executive in the companies I've worked for. And I'm more of the drill sergeant kind of personality in my past. And it's a very effective, shortest distance between 2 points sometimes, where it's like someone just yells at you and gets you back on track, and you literally travel less distance and you get what you want quicker. My father was like this when I grew up, and I learned to appreciate that immensely, that he was just like, stop doing that, do this. And I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't take offense. After a while, I was just like, okay, yeah, great. Thanks for getting me back on track, Dad. Now, as I get older, I realize everybody's softer, and especially if someone doesn't know me, I'm taking the slightly longer, more emotional route to acknowledge, how everyone's going to feel about the information. My God, everything just resolves itself beautifully. I think it resolves itself better in the end than my previous technique. People more dedicated to doing things correctly and getting what they want out of the project that we're working on by a slightly softer hand. It's something that comes with maturity, right? I said a long time ago, we never get a manual to life, right? We never get a manual to life. And even if the Bible for some is a good manual for life, and I'll acknowledge that. I don't know the Quran, I don't know other writings. But even the Bible only goes so far, right? It generally has all the answers if you're willing to follow everything it says, even if you're not of that religion. At least the New Testament, where it kind of gets rid of the eye for an eye algorithm, right? But there's so much more to the complexity of a 21st century life than could be conceived a couple thousand years ago, or at least when Francis Bacon cranked the thing out, right? The King James Bible. First time anyone ever got a chance to read this idea. Okay. The old story, the old saying, it takes a village to raise a kid. Man, coming from a tiny town, that's 1,000% true. 1,000% true. Provided you have a good balanced town. I was super blessed to grow up in an extremely well-balanced town. How can a town be balanced versus a city that's completely chaotic and crazy, creating all of the chaos in the universe? Remember, cities are an abomination of mankind. They are. I don't care how much happiness you've had in a city. They're abominations that are absolutely against humanity's natural willingness to congregate. It's too many people in a small place. Again, the reason why, one of the analogies I can give you is you could go downtown Los Angeles, or no one ever goes down there, but like you go Santa Monica Boulevard, you could just flip off every single car on a corner. One, no one's going to care, and you'll never see those people again if you come every single day at the same time. You'll miss them. It's that big. It's that many. So your accountability to humanity is zero. But you get in a small town, and the reason why they harmonize so much better, like a township, 6 miles square, right? There's only so many houses you can fit in 6 miles square. And if you have country between that and the next town, it harmonizes into a consciousness that is like, we are good. How could we not be good? Because if we're bad, well, the city's going to clean you out. Or the town's going to clean you out, I should say. In the city, you can do anything you want. It just manifests. It gets more and more horrible. Name anything in life that humanity's experienced, the Sodom and Gomorrah crap that we're seeing today. How does it exist? Because people can hide in cities. Why is it that every kid that gets a bunch of mental illness in a little town usually moves to the big city until they find out it either eats them up, like Welcome to the Jungle says, or in my family, I had one guy move to San Francisco, then Los Angeles, and then back to the Midwest, and now he's being harmonized back to his roots, and he loves it. But one thing is very interesting about life, and none of us really want to admit it. None of us really want to admit it. And some of us get lucky and we marry into, we get into a marriage that kind of postpones this reality. But even in a marriage, it could be very similar. You're alone. You're alone as a human being, no matter how many people you got around you. Now, some people get extremely addicted to being someplace with other people constantly. There's nothing wrong with that if that works for you. In the end, you probably won't meet yourself very well, and you don't have to, as long as you're happy. But I think a lot of folks, especially when they crawl into virtual communities like social media, they're becoming more and more alone. And being alone is not a natural thing for man. But there always is going to be that center of your sphere of influence. It's just you. In the end, it's just you. Usually we take showers by ourselves, unless you're President Biden and you're with your daughter. But other than that, we're usually by ourselves. You have to have the wherewithal to be happy in that little space, right? Like one of my good friends told me, he said, look, if you don't make yourself whole and make yourself interesting, then you have nothing to give to anybody else. You don't take someone else and complete yourself with someone else. You complete yourself, and then you complete the partnership. A partnership is a different level of completion. Both wonderful things, but you have to recognize your yin is complete, your yang is complete. You are either one of those two hemispheres, whichever one you choose, and your spouse or your partner might be the other thing. But then you're the yin yang, and that has its own completion. It's two different levels of completion, but each one of them must be complete, or you're incomplete. And you have to acknowledge in your partners, especially, that they need to be complete as well. Not telling them this as a lecture, but when you see them, you want to empower them to be complete. A lot of times you'll be, like my friend's mother said to her, she said, don't let the men in your life be attracted to your flame only to put it out when they finally get you into a relationship. Because this is what happened to her a couple times. We've all had that happen. Someone chases away who you are. Now, I'm pretty bold, pretty bullheaded, I should say, so that never really happened to me. But some folks will allow that to happen. You become a simp, right? You just cower down to your partner. And there's no completion to that one at all. But let me ask you, how many negative people do you like to hang out with? You get around them and they're Debbie Downer, like that Saturday Night Live skit. Was it Rachel Dretch? Was that her name? The Debbie Downer. No matter what was said, down, down, down the conversation went. My mother told me an amazing piece of information when I was young. She said, look, you can't date or marry a person who's depressed because all they can do is bring you down. And I kept that little jewel in my brain, and then I ended up dating someone I was really in love with. She was very much in love with me. But within 6 months, probably even before 6 months, I found out that she was clinically depressed. And she would just break out, I mean, way outside of any type of menstruation cycle. She would just break down and just cry, and like seriously cry. And I'd say, what's going on? And she goes, I don't know. I just get this feeling. It's like her dopamine levels would just drop out. She wasn't a drug user or anything like that, quite balanced in life, very accomplished woman. But she just couldn't control her emotions. That's why drugs of all kinds, even weed, not good for you. You don't want to mess with the chemistry in your brain. You need to let that stuff solidify without the chemical enhancement and deal with whatever's left. If you really want to be just 100% autonomous, right? That's why I think a lot of people struggle to find a partner in life, because they don't realize that they're not complete. They're trying to complete themselves with another person. They get on a few dates with an individual and it's going great until that other individual either consciously or subconsciously realizes that you're not complete. And there are other people that are. And so you might be more attractive than their next option physically, according to their definition of what attraction is. But they'll take that other person because they're more confident and complete. What would completeness yield in your consciousness? Confidence, right? It's not ego. Ego is when you're overconfident, in my opinion. You know, depending on what you're trying to do in life, you got to have a little bit of ego. I just heard a really great interview with the keyboard player from The Revolution for Prince's band. I guess Dr. Fink, right? They asked him if Prince was a narcissist, because that's the big buzzword today, right? You know, and he said the most intelligent answer. He's a very brilliant guy. This was an interview at Sunset Studios. If you want to look it up on YouTube, it's great. About 45 minutes long. It's fantastic. And he said, he goes, well, I think that you have to have a level of narcissism if you're going to be the greatest that you can be. And it never really dawned on me. It's like, oh yeah, that is probably true. Because you're going to have to fake it till you make it kind of thing, but you have to have this vision of yourself. And this is also very powerful with what we're talking about. If you have a vision of yourself that you want to be, and instead of that reverse psychology where you're like, well, I'm going to be that thing and I'm going to make it happen or whatever, you actually pretend that you're already that being and it just starts to become you. I'm going to be positive from now on. That doesn't work. You say, I'm so glad I'm so positive. I'm glad that I don't let this stuff bother me. I'm glad I'm not suspicious. You know, I'm just not that guy. And eventually your mind hears that and your neural peptides hear that and you start manufacturing the you that you want to be, physically and mentally. I think these conversations and this subject matter is so outside the spectrum of normal conversations and normal conscious thought of humanity that we have to bring it up. We have to make episodes like this. This is like us sitting around a campfire in some little country town. And it's just fall going into winter. And so we're all kind of just chilled out. The fire's warming us up. It's got a glow. It's beautiful. Maybe it's in the middle of summer. And you got an old guy like me sitting there. And I got an old guy for me too. And we're just going in circles. Talking about what we have found works. What keeps us out of mischief within our own consciousness and perhaps in our subconsciousness. Yielding control of who we are as a human being. There's almost no one I can name that was a great person that can't name one person in their life that was a huge inspiration to that greatness. Sometimes that love could be brutal and sometimes it could be beautiful. Steve Jobs talked about the fact that his adopted father was an engineer, and he built a little engineering workshop bench inside the garage for Steve. And so Steve had a chance to get his brain, thinking in an engineering way when he was really young. And then when he got a chance to help make the game Breakout in a stand-up arcade, and they said, look, Steve, the name of the game is to use as few chips as possible to make a game that we can charge $0.25 for. Because then the production cost of the box and the computer inside is much lower and we make more money. As soon as he heard that, he was like, I've already got engineering background technically in my head. Of course, Wozniak was a genius, 5 years older, right? Prince, his father was a jazz pianist, right? But he was brutal. He would ground Prince to sit down in the basement where there was a piano. And so Prince would have to practice the piano if he wanted to have any fun in the basement. That one's a little more militant. But the guy turns out to be one of the most amazing musicians that ever lived. But what's interesting about the internet at this point and the television that comes through the internet is we can find each other, right? We can inspire each other. And that's why I think credibility is gigantic. You got to be, I've got 750 episodes. If you dig what I say and how I say it, then I'm for you, right? If you have a channel, then you have the same rapport with me, then it goes both ways, right? That's why a lot of your comments are profound to me. It's phenomenal. It has an effect on me sometimes, Anyway, I hope you found this conversation valuable and potentially enlightening. I think it's interesting that, that people are starting to talk about this other layer of consciousness, this other entity of consciousness. Well, my friend said souls tend to congregate based on their overall flaws or their overall design, So if you're a good person, then you're going to be around other souls that will be attracted to you if they're good. Now, stake oil salesmen and long play con men, they can smell you a mile away and they'll attract to you and play off, like in their confidence man, right? They're conning you into thinking that they're like you, but they're not, which is why you have to have some instincts for reading a character. Some people are guarded until you prove yourself out, and then they let you in, right? But I think we have to acknowledge that potentially these beings were never human. Potentially these beings never can be human. Maybe they don't want to be human. Maybe they just want to feed off of us, right? Through getting us to have states of consciousness that have really no benefit to us, right? Like I said in the Black Apple episode, I said, look, is it easier to have a negative emotion or is it easier to have a positive emotion? And the sad truth might be that it's much easier for us to have negative emotions, because everything going wrong is pretty easy. Like when you build that house of cards, right? You have to be very careful with every card that you stack up, the Jenga block, tower, whatever. But how much effort does it take to pull one card out and the whole thing falls? And if you want to long play it, you keep pulling out cards towards the top until you just cause this cascade. And then if something can feed off of the destruction or the dismay of it falling apart, then they win 24/7. But to build that thing and get a big pop, right? 100x pop from creating something beautiful, be it a child, be it some project you're working on, that takes a lot of effort. It could take a couple of years. When I made video games, man, some of these games would take 2 years, 3 years to make. No one saw the game. When we made Ultima Online, I played a beta of that. I played a Delta version of the game in 94. Well, the game didn't come out till 98. That was 4 years. And the guys that made the Delta version were working on it for a couple of years before that. So 6 years or so for them. Now, when it goes out and it's the first MMO in the world, whoa, they had a reward every single day that people logged in. You feel me, right? Anyway, let me know what you think about this kind of stuff. And let me know if you have any personal experiences that speak to this entire theory. And especially speak to me if you've conquered this using any technique, especially ones I didn't mention. That's the most valuable. I'd love to hear your feedback. But if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything's up there, podcast, all the videos. Remember, we're on Rumble and BitChute. BitChute, I think, has the most complete collection of them all. Rumble did just upgrade their website, so they got rid of the search field inside my channel, so hopefully that comes back. We got a brand new store. It currently has one new t-shirt and all the other stuff is up there. The prices have come down and I make a little bit of money now for the first time in years. So if you're interested in that, wearing some swag, it's cool. We're really going with the 2015 thing to just say, look, we're an institution, we've been around for a long time. I say we because there's definitely other contributors. Remember Telegram channel, Deep Thoughts channel. I think we are one of the best channels that's out there. We've widened the spectrum of things that we post. There'll be literally we have posts that contradict each other. So depending on what you believe, you should find something that fits your pocket. The real thing is about coming together and just sharing our thoughts productively. And so far, so good. But anyway, to the PayPal and Patreon folks, thank you so much and make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.